How's it going, guys? Just wanted to give you a quick talk about the meta currently. I did go to YCS Philadelphia a couple weekends ago, and I played a really random and unknown deck, so I can't really comment on how I did with a sort of meta deck at that event, but I did have a lot of experience with the meta. I played two different Yugioh decks. I played one Trap Tricks deck, and I played a couple of other things that are sort of like tier 2 and lower, but for the most part, it seemed like Trap Tricks dominated the event. I know that they've had a lot of hype lately. The Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare was like $3 before that weekend, and it shot up to right around 30 by the end of the weekend. So the deck did really, really well. I think there was a total of 11 Trap Tricks decks in the top 32, and then 5 of those 11 made it also to the top 16, which is really impressive. That was the most of any one deck that top 16, second only to Yugioh, which had 4. So Yugioh was also really popular. I think that some people say that Yugioh has the better matchup against the Trap Tricks deck just because of Armor's high defense, which is true. I also think that, you know, if the Yugioh players are still running Trap Stun or Wiretaps, they have a distinct advantage against a deck that runs so many traps. But it is at least an interesting match. I think they are both very competitive decks, and it's hard to say that one is going to always beat the other one or vice versa. But some of the other decks that were topping, Dragon Rulers, Evil Swarms, there was a couple of Madolche decks. I think people expected for Madolche to just completely smash that tournament and be 16 out of the top 16 decks. Unfortunately, I think people realized pretty quick that the deck is very vulnerable and very fragile. The OTK is very, very strong and much more consistent now that we have Angeli. But any sort of interruption in that combo, especially at pivotal points like with Leviair and Invoker, really puts them out of that game because they lose a lot of resources. They're investing pretty much all of their resources in that combo, and with the expectation of getting that investment back at the end of the combo whenever they add back the Mufui and Angeli from Leviair and Tiramisu. But if you interrupt that combo, the deck is sort of dead in the water and it doesn't have a whole lot of defense. I think a lot of people dropped the Ghost Trick engine from the Trick or Treat deck that was running around before we got Angeli. But I think that, you know, if you're going to play the deck and you really like that combo and you like the way the deck is played, I would recommend keeping the Ghost Trick stuff in just because of the fragility of the combo. The Ghost Trick stuff was really a nice fallback and sort of gave them an out to the DD Crows and the Veilers to be able to stay alive long enough to do that combo again. Nonetheless, the deck is still very good. I don't think it is as good as the previous hype before YCS Philly. I think that people realize that now, seeing that, you know, only 2 made it to the top 16. Even though the person that won the event was playing Madolche in the event, I still think that it's not the best deck of the format, just because you have to consider the fact that after the top 16, it is draft sealed play. So he wasn't using the Madolche deck in the top 16 to get his first place spot. He was actually using a drafted deck that they made once they cut to top 16. So he did make it to top 16 with Madolche, but, you know, after that, it wasn't that deck that got him the win of that YCS. And you also have to consider the fact that there was 5 Trap Tricks decks compared to 2 Madolche decks in the top 16. So I think that Trap Tricks and Yugioh are definitely the top 2 decks of the format. There are things to be watching out for in the coming weeks until we get the Shaddoll archetype and some new really, really interesting things in the game. I think that archetype alone is really going to change how the game is played in whenever we get it in the TCG. But for now, expect a lot of Yugioh, a lot of Trap Tricks. You might want to consider siding Trap Stuns for the Trap Tricks. I know that they rely heavily on the hands, so if you get them to a point where you can stop the traps for a turn and they don't have either of the hands, you can really put a lot of damage on board because they run such a low monster count. And, you know, if you can get your summons to walk, they really don't have a whole lot of sort of hand trap answers. Most of the time they're just manning things like Maxi so that they can get their resources back if they get their back row shut down like that. Nonetheless, expect those two decks. So side cards that I would recommend, especially for the Trap Tricks deck, Debunk is a really popular card. It's going up in price. It's probably going to continue to climb as long as Trap Tricks are relevant. It doesn't work as well against the Yugioh matchup, but you can side things like System Down against the Yugioh is pretty good. Some people are siding things like more hand traps. Maxi Veiler is good against them. There's really not too much that you can side against that deck, unfortunately. You could side things like Swift Scarecrow, but they put out in pretty impressive boards most of the time. So even if you do Scarecrow, you really have to have a strong deck to back that up to still stay in that game. If you guys have any other suggestions for sides against Yugioh, please leave them in the comments. I know, especially for me, one of my favorite cards against them is Ixie Encore. It was very, very popular in the Dragon Roller format because it was really the best way around things like Dracosac, and especially when they had to go up against Evil Swarms and they had to deal with no Fion. Ixie Encore was great back then. I think it's still great now. It's really good against Medolce. It stops their combo and it can't be trap stunned, so it's pretty much like a hand trap, because most of the time if they're going to go off, they do have trap stun. But I think it's also good against Yugioh because if they bring those level 3 monsters out with gear to make the Gigant to start plussing off of their monster effects, you can respond to Gigant Summon with Ixie Encore, and they come back at level 2. Their levels reset when they go to the grave, even though they were raised by gear, and they come back at level 2. So there's really nothing they can do with them. A lot of them are running rank 3s like Sola Silver Mountain, Alucard, and the generic good rank 3s. But when you take those things down to 2, they pretty much just become dead monsters on field, and if they don't have the proper resources to sort of come back from something like that, Ixie Encore could really be a game winner for you. And also they do run trap stun. Again, Ixie Encore is really good for that. Also, Ixie Encore is good for sort of random things like Felgrand and Excite Knight, just because its activation can't be responded to. I don't know if I'm saying the exact wording right on that, but basically your opponent can't respond to Ixie Encore. Something else to watch out for, there were a couple Infernity decks that topped. Putting Barrier to 1 unfortunately did not kill that deck, just because it has such a strong opening and it has proper negation and proper destruction with Infernity Break and Infernity Barrier. So be prepared for that. There's unfortunately not a whole lot that you can do against that deck. Again, you could side hand traps would be best, I think, just because if they win their die roll and they're able to get their combo off first turn, it's very hard to come back, and you're also going to be going second game 3 even if you do manage to win game 2. So it's always good to consider main decking some hand traps. I think they're very pivotal to the game. A lot of the top 32 and the top 16 decks were maining 3 Maxis, mostly just because they were either combo-oriented decks like Yugioh and Medolce, or they were decks that really needed that draw power like Trap Tricks, because they're using so many resources. They're burning through Fire Hand and Ice Hand, and they're using lots of traps, and they have a low monster count. So as far as if you're playing the meta, I would suggest playing at least 2 Maxis, probably 3. It isn't as great against sort of stun decks like the Trap Tricks, but sometimes you can get at least a +1 off of the Fire Hand and Ice Hand. There's really not too many other things. The water's sort of fallen out of grace. I don't think that the deck is going to last much longer. I think it's just sort of getting outshined by a lot of things that we're getting, a lot of new things. And I think especially once we get Satella Knights and Shaddolls, that deck will probably be by the wayside. I think that it will be a thing of the past. Although, not to say that it isn't a bad deck, it just is becoming outdated, I guess. Some other things to consider, there are still some people playing the Lightsworn Ruler deck. It did get top 8 at a regionals right before YCS Philadelphia, so there were a few people playing that deck. I know myself, Lightsworn is close to my heart. It's been my favorite deck for ever since I've started playing Yu-Gi-Oh again, and I'm really excited about getting this new stuff. So I actually did take that deck to a couple of the side events, and it did fairly well. It does what the deck does. So be expecting that. With the mention of Lightstorm Rulers, another side deck card that you probably should have in now is Cycle Reader. It did get a fair amount of hype whenever artifacts were announced, just because it's very, very good against them. And with the popularity of Consular Artifacts and Artifact Anything, and maybe even Lightstorm Rulers once we get the new structure deck, Cycle Reader is going to be a good side card. It's a hand trap, it's hard to deal with. And on the reverse side of hand traps that you can side, Skullmeister is also, in my opinion, a very good card. I know a lot of people are, some people are hyping it, some people are knocking it. I don't know. I do think that it deserves the price that it has because it is from Star Strike Blast. It's a secret that that had a very short printing. Those cards are very hard to get a hold of. That's why we still have Vanity's Emptiness at $20 for a common. It's from the same set. And Skullmeister is very, very relevant right now. It stops artifacts, it stops the hands, it stops dragon rulers, it stops a lot of things, and you can even use it to stop Geargig and X if you send it to the grave and you don't want them sort of specialing back that monster to the field to protect them. So I think that Skullmeister is a very good card. A good friend of mine picked up a bunch of them at YCS Philly because he saw it coming down the pipeline that this card might be relevant to side, and I think that he was right. I think it sort of deserves the attention that it's getting for now. Not sure if I missed anything. I think that's all I wanted to go over with you guys. Nothing too unexpected outside of the Trap Tricks deck. I don't think that there's too much else that I want to go over with you guys. If you guys have any other suggestions of decks to expect, cards to side, or decks to even play to sort of try and shift the meta to counteract some of the things that we've seen in the past few weeks, or if you think that it's going in a good direction. Personally, I think that as far as the Trap Tricks deck, it sounds like it's going, this might sound crazy to some people, it sounds like it's going back to goat control format. The deck is very control based, it's very stun based, sort of anti-meta, and it is a compilation of several different sort of archetypes and things like Goat Control was, and just something small to consider. They call it a Trap Tricks deck, but there's only 4 Trap Tricks monsters in the deck, and with Scapegoat they called it Goat Control, even though there's really only 3 Scapegoats in the deck. So something to consider. It might be a parallel that I just drew that might have no relevance at all. But let me know what you guys think about the meta, where it's going, where you think it should go, and we will see you next time.